and welcome to our presentation on common budget mistakes and how to avoid them. Quick disclaimer, this presentation and all other presentations are not a substitute for the law. The following is not considered legal advice and is for information purposes only. Indiana code always governs. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what is your number one resource, our gateway access, the summer budget workshops, some of the common mistakes by some of the forms, special circumstances and unit type specific questions, and what to do when the unexpected happens. So first and foremost, what is your number one resource? That is going to be your Department of Local Government Finance budget field rep. We cannot give financial advice or legal advice, but we can help go through the forms as you enter them to Gateway for some of the common mistakes we're going to discuss today, and some mistakes that I may not have thought of while putting this presentation together. We'll be able to double check your budget calendar to make sure that you are compliant with statute. When you do fill out the budget forms, sometimes when you run the error prevention report, there are errors and you may not fully understand how to fix those. We can help you resolve some of those errors. We can explain how the forms are supposed to work and how they work together. And we can even pull some historical figures to help you with your estimations going forward. If you haven't heard from your budget field rep, please feel free to reach out to them as soon as possible, as we will start scheduling our summer budget workshops next month. So Gateway Access, we have launched a new online limited delegation of authority application. So if you are going to need edit access or read access to the information in Gateway, you will have to go through this process, and the submitter for the unit will be able to grant you access online. That website will be gatewaylda.ifionline.org. Also, just as a reminder that has been stated in the commissioner's emails, early in June, we are going to remove all of the access permissions for editor and read only, and you will have to go back and re-ask for those permissions. Now, if you were supposed to be the submitter for a unit and you do not have access to Gateway, please reach out to your field rep as soon as possible so we can get that resolved. Now we're going to talk a little bit about summer budget workshops. Summer budget workshops are usually held between July 15th and August 30th of each year. So what are some of the benefits of coming to a workshop? This is an opportunity for you to meet one-on-one with your budget field rep. We will collect some financial information to help determine the fundability of your budgets. We can help you estimate some of the revenues and even spread some of the revenues on our July estimates that are going to go to multiple funds. We can help review your meeting dates to make sure you meet statutory obligations. And we can review your levies and help make sure that you are either set above, at, or under your maximum levy as is your desire. We can also help you determine what is the maximum allowable rate on the rate-driven funds. We can help review debt and amortization schedules, and we can help discuss the fundability of the budget and potential effects on cash balances based on the decisions you make. We can assist with completing some of the forms and give instruction on how to finish the forms after the meetings. Now, when you come to your summer budget workshop, your field rep's going to need a few things from you. First, we're going to need a copy of your June 30 financials. We will need to know what the June 30 cash balance is, including investments by fund. And we will need to know what you have spent in each fund in total from January 1 through June 30th. It's extremely helpful if you already have the Form 1 filled out before coming to the workshops, but if time is running out, we can work with the bottom line totals. It will also be important for you to make sure that you have your meeting dates picked out before coming to the workshops. We are going to need the date, time, and location of the public hearing and adoption meeting if you are wanting our assistance with completing the Form 3. But if you just want to make sure that they're timely, make sure that you have the dates ready for us. So now we're going to look through some of the budget forms to talk about the mistakes that can be made on each one. We're going to start here with the current year financial worksheet. The current year financial worksheet is a snapshot of your financial situation as of June 30th. This form is the starting point of the 18-month cycle covered throughout all the budget forms. Completing this form will help fill out lines 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 16 on the Form 4B. To start with, units forget to list their encumbrances on this form. An encumbrance is an expense that was budgeted in one year but didn't get spent for whatever reason, and that expense is carried forward to the next year. If you are unsure whether or not something qualifies as an encumbrance, or you want to know the proper procedures to encumber appropriations from one year to the next, please reach out to the State Board of Accounts. You are going to want to include any encumbrances from 2023 into 2024 for this year on that line 2, encumbrances brought forward line. This is going to increase your approved appropriations for the current year. Next thing units forget is listing their non-appropriated obligations. A non-appropriated obligation is something that shows in the disbursement total in your financials but does not count against your approved appropriation. Some examples of non-appropriated obligations are going to be purchase of investments or insurance reimbursements or some transfers of funds, whether that is a transfer due to levy excess your field rep notified you that you had, a permanent transfer to rainy day, or a transfer to take out or repay a temporary loan. The key concern when it comes to non-appropriated disbursements is, does this show as part of your expenditures for the first 6 months? If it's not showing as part of the expenditures, then you don't need to worry about listing it. But if it is very important that the non-appropriated obligations is listed. So what are some of the mistakes units make when they list their expenditures? I have seen units that list only what they spent for the month of June. Since we're going to look at your approved appropriations less expenditures to find out what you have left to spend for the last half of the year, it's extremely important that it's the total for the 6 months. And then on occasion, as we all do, we pick up the wrong column and I get revenues instead of expenses. And on occasion, I get the wrong line where they pick up from another fund instead of the fund that they're currently working with. So please double check the amount that you're entering for your expenditures to your financial reports. Additional appropriations and reductions to appropriations can be found on 2 different areas on the current year financial worksheet. Lines 3A and 3B are for the first 6 months of the calendar year. To be able to include an additional appropriation or a reduction to appropriation for the first 6 months of the year, you need to have entered the additional appropriation and had it approved through the additional appropriation application prior to June 30th. It is extremely important as you do additional appropriations throughout the year to get them entered in a timely fashion for this reason. Also, please note that if you approve additional appropriation on July 29th, but you don't enter it until July 2nd, please hold that to the additional appropriation line for the second half of the year. For line 8, you will list the total reductions that you plan on doing after June 30th. Before we can work a reduction to appropriations into the budget, we must have a signed resolution, or you need to submit the reduction through the additional appropriation application. If we don't have the actual paperwork showing that the board has approved that reduction, we cannot reduce your current year expenditures. Line 10 is going to be for any planned additional appropriations for the last half of the year. So line 15 is you're going to list your cash balance. Make sure you pull the June 30th cash balance. I've seen them list the beginning of June. I've seen them list the beginning of January instead of that June 30 ending cash balance. Also, if you have any investments, make sure those are included in the amount you're listing as well. Line 16 is for your December tax draw. This amount should be the lesser of your certified levy or abstract levy, less circuit breaker, minus what was deposited as June settlement for property taxes by June 30th. If the amount you're putting for your cash balance for June 30th does not include your June settlement because it didn't get deposited till July, then you're going to want to show a full year on line 16 taxes to be collected. Also, make sure that your budget field rep is aware of this so that we can make sure these numbers are correct when we work your budget. We do offer a July estimate that will help with the calculation. 2024 December property tax collections calculation worksheet. This will be made available sometime in the month of July. Next, we're going to look at Form 1. Form 1 is going to be broken up by fund and by department and has the subcategories of personal services, supplies, services and charges, capital outlays, and debt service. If you need to add a line item to the Form 1, you're going to need to pick the subcategory and enter the description at minimum and click Add. You are also going to want to make sure that you say before you switch funds, before you switch departments, or before you switch categories. Form 1 is definitely one of those save early, save often forms. Now, as you're working on filling out the Form 1, things to think about will be the number of pay periods. Is this one of those odd years where you have 27 pays? You want to make sure you account for that when you're filling out your Form 1. If you upload information through the flat file upload function of Gateway, you're going to want to double check that at least those bottom line totals match. Also, things to consider, are you adding staff? Are you reducing staff? Are you making a one-time purchase this year? Are you going to be budgeting for a new fund this year? Did you establish a new cumulative fund? This is time to make sure that you have it as part of your budget. Are you going to issue new debt? This is the time to add it. Also remember, the details on the Form 1 are for your use only. Make sure they make sense for you. You may have taken over a unit that has listed pens for $100, pencils for $50, paper for $100, and it makes sense to combine all those into just office supplies. Or you might want to look at things in more detail, like they have utilities and you want to break that into water, gas, and electric. That is all perfectly fine. Make sure that the details on the Form 1 make sense to you. Next, we're going to look at the Form 2. The Form 2 is all revenue that is not property tax for your unit to receive. This form is going to be broken down by fund and by category. Our categories are tax and interlocal government, license and permits, charges for services, fines, forfeitures and fees, and other receipts. And just like the Form 1, you're going to want to save between funds. You're going to want to save between categories. But unlike the Form 1, you will not be able to add new revenues straight onto the Form 2. You will have to go through the Customize section of Gateway. Form 2 is broken into 2 columns. Column A is for the last half of the current year, and column B is for the entire 12 months of the budget year. As you're looking at the revenues codes listed on your Form 2, ask yourself, are you still receiving this revenue? I had a unit several years ago that listed $1,000 every year for revenue. And when we started talking about their revenues, they hadn't received this in at least a decade. There's no reason to continue listing a revenue you are not receiving. Are revenues still coming in the way you've estimated? I mean, if you're continually getting 2-3 times what you're estimating, you may want to bump that amount up. And at the same time, if it's coming in way low what you've been estimating, you may want to bring that revenue down. You can also consider, should other revenues be listed? You may be receiving interest and never put it on before. There's no requirement to add it now, but you may want to add it in the future. Also consider, how are the revenues coming in? Is it pretty stable from month to month? Do you get this just once a year? And if you've only got it once a year, have you gotten it yet? One revenue that comes to mind is Riverboat. Riverboat usually comes in August and September, so you're going to have a full year amount in column A for the last half of the year and a full year amount in column B because you haven't received it prior to June 30th. You know, if this is a revenue that comes in twice a year, have you received your first payment? Have you received your second payment? So if it normally comes in June and December, but you didn't get your June payment, you didn't receive in the June payment by June 30th, you may have a full year in column A and column B. But a revenue that comes in January and July, maybe you've already gotten your July payment. So column A is 0 and column B is a full year amount. Look at those so that you're not counting revenue that you've already received and you're not missing out on revenue that you haven't yet. Your Form 2, you do want to stay conservative on, but you don't want to be so conservative that you weren't showing enough revenue to fund your budget. Transfers to rainy day. We cannot include any transfer to rainy day in column A without a signed resolution. And we are not allowed to accept any transfers to rainy day for column B. Transfers to rainy day are supposed to be for unencumbered, unexpended appropriations. And at the time of the budget, you don't know what is going to fall into that category for the budget year. Form 3. Form 3 is your notice to taxpayers. This is how you advertise your budget and tell your taxpayers what you're planning on doing for the year. Once it is submitted, it is advertised at budgetnotices.in.gov, and it's split into two main sections. The first contains information for the name of the adopting body, date, time, and location of the public hearing and the adoption meeting. Things to consider when you're scheduling your meeting. Except for first class and second class cities, the public hearing and adoption meeting must be a minimum of 10 days apart. You want to review your calendar and make sure you're going to have a quorum available for both the public hearing and adoption meeting dates, as a quorum is necessary to hold either meeting. Things to look at as you set your calendar. Did you set a meeting for Labor Day, which is always the first Monday in September? Did you set it for Columbus Day, which is always the second Monday in October? Did you set it on a weekend? Note that these dates are all acceptable dates for you to hold your public hearing or your adoption meeting, but you're going to want to ask yourself, will your board be available to meet on those dates? There can also be an issue of not having enough time between the submission of the Form 3 and the public hearing. The Form 3 must be submitted a minimum of 10 calendar days prior to the public hearing. We have a color indication on whether or not the form is submitted. If your Form 3 is still yellow, it has not been submitted. You want it to be green to show that the Form 3 has been submitted and published on budgetnotices.in.gov. Again, double check that you have enough meetings between your public hearing and your adoption meeting, and that you've scheduled meetings when a quorum is available, and that you've given yourself enough time to reschedule meetings if that is necessary. The next part of the Form 3 contains the proposed budgets, levies, and appeals. The form is already populated with the current year certified budgets, and there's a column that, as you complete the Form 3, will show the percentage change for the current certified levy to the proposed levies. So as you look at budgets, you're going to want to look and make sure you've included all the new funds that you need to. Did you establish a new cumulative fund? You're going to want to make sure that's listed on your Form 3. Are you going to be issuing new debt and need a new debt fund? You're going to want to make sure that's seen here on the Form 3. We cannot certify a budget, levy, or rate for a fund that is not listed on the Form 3. One thing to do is also compare column 2 budget estimates to your Form 1 advertised columns. Do these amounts match? The Form 3 is also going to set the ceiling for what we can approve as a budget. Look at the budgets and take a minute to compare them to last year's adopted budget and last year's certified budget. Do any increases or decreases make sense? There's no good rule of thumb on how much budget should grow or decrease because we don't know what is going on with your unit. As we talked about with the Form 1, you may be making a special purchase. So some of these capital purchases are only made once every couple of years, like a fire truck. Don't usually go out and buy a new fire truck every year. So if you bought one last year, the budget you're proposing this year could be much lower. And at the same time, if you're planning on buying one this year, it could be much higher than it has been in the past. But make sure you understand where your budgets are increasing and decreasing and why. Levies. Do you have levies listed on the Form 3? Just like budgets, the Form 3 sets the ceiling for what we can approve for a certified levy. And every year we have at least one unit that submits the Form 3 with no levies listed. Compare your levies this year that are proposed in column 3 to the current certified levies in column 5. Do the increases and decreases make sense? Also, one thing to remember, if you are planning on filing an excessive levy appeal, that needs to be listed in column 4. If you do not list the appeal amount on the Form 3, we will not be able to approve it. There is a section on the Form 3 that the department populates with your estimated maximum levy. You'll want to take this and compare it to the levies that you have advertised on your Form 3 to make sure that you are where you want to be in relationship to your maximum levy. Debt funds do not count towards the maximum levy, and some of the cumulative funds do not count towards the maximum levy. If you're curious on what does or doesn't, please reach out to your DLGF field rep. When you look at the maximum levy placed on the Form 3, there may need to be some adjustments taken into consideration. Each July, we release a maximum levy estimate, and this is now an Excel document and has places where you can make adjustment to these figures. When you look at the form, anytime a cell is highlighted in yellow, you're allowed to make an adjustment and it will recalculate your total maximum levy there at the bottom. The form will be currently populated with the proposed appeal amounts for the budget from the pre-budget worksheet, but this number may have increased or decreased as you have more information from when you completed that in June to when you're completing your budget in August, September. So there is a place for you to add in the new appeal amount. The CCD adjustment, we're going to populate that with the maximum CCD adjustment based on the prior year certified net assessed value. As that number becomes available, you may want to repopulate with what the actual CCD fund is going to bring in. We also have lines available for the maximum mental health and developmental disability amounts for the counties. We're going to start the calculation with the maximum. The county may be adopting less, and you will want to make those adjustments so you can compare what you're advertising and adopting to a more accurate figure for your maximum levy. Next, we're going to move into the Form 4, which is the ordinance or resolution for adoption of tax rates. The Form 4 is going to be divided into 3 sections. The first section will list the adopting body and the adoption date. The adoption date on the Form 4 should match the adoption date on the Form 3. When we get to special circumstances, we will talk about when those don't match, but 90% of the time, the date of adoption should be the date that was listed on the Form 3. The second section of the Form 4 is going to list the budgets, levies, and rates to be adopted. The Form 4 that is currently shown on the screen has a $1,000 budget for Casino Riverboat and nothing else entered. We have gotten Form 4s that have looked like this every year. And if you adopt a 0 levy and a 0 rate, that is what we can approve for your budget. So you want to make sure that everywhere there should be a number, there is a number greater than 0, there is a number greater than 0. I would also take a minute to compare your Form 4 to the Form 3. Lots of units like to advertise high and adopt low. Their Form 3 is filled with the wish lists of their different departments, and the Form 4 is more closely related to what the unit can actually afford to spend. But make sure that the changes from the Form 3 to the Form 4 make sense to you. If you advertise $10,000 for the general fund, are you really wanting to adopt 0? 9,000? I would also take a minute and compare this year's Form 4 to the actual certified budget for this year. Budget, yeah. Again, do the changes in levies and budgets and rates make sense to you? I mean, if you were certified a total tax rate of 50 cents, and this year you're looking to adopt a total tax rate of 0.05, does that make sense? Did you really mean to cut it that much, or is there a possibility that we need to go back and look at the assessed values that you had on the Form 4B? The last section of the Form 4 is to adopt the budget. You're going to want to make sure you list all of your board members and that all the board members present mark their vote and sign the form. We need both for their vote to count. So if they just mark aye and they don't sign it, that is not a yes vote for your budget. Also, after you're done with the Form 4 and you scan and you upload it into Gateway, I would go and double check and make sure that the Form 4 is still legible and that we can read those votes and those signatures. The last form, the 1782 recipients, is an extremely important form. This is what we're going to use to decide who to send your 1782 notice to once the budget has been worked. As soon as we send that email out, that is going to start your 10-day review period. So you're going to want to look through the names and email addresses that are listed. Should anyone be added? Do you have new board members? Are you a new official? Since what we start with is a rollover from last year's 1782 recipients, take a minute and make sure that everybody that is on that list is somebody you still want to receive the 1782. And that if anybody didn't make it on the list that should get it, you want to add them. This list is also only used for the 1782 notice, so you may want to add a backup email address. Every year we have at least one person who gets locked out of their main email address at the time this is getting delivered. You don't want to miss getting this form. And then the last thing you're definitely want to do is look through and make sure there are no typos. If you typed in @gmail.com instead of gmail.com, you're not going to get your 1782 notice, and so double check and make sure you've got periods where they should be, instead of commas, that we have com instead of con, and that the email addresses are in fact correct. There's also errors that can be made in the budget submission. The only form that gets submitted before the adoption, that must be submitted before the adoption, is the Form 3. And again, this must be submitted a minimum of 10 calendar days before the public hearing. All other forms are to be submitted a maximum of 5 business days after the adoption meeting. We have 3 different examples of the accordion files here. The first one is all yellow, means nothing has been submitted. The second one, only the Form 3 has been submitted, so they have advertised and they are somewhere between advertisement and their adoption meeting. And the last one is when all the forms have been submitted. This is how you want your gateway to look. The only exception would be if you do not have debt, then the debt worksheet would remain yellow. Special circumstances. One of the special circumstances we have is when board members are unable to vote on the budget. So IC code 36-1-23-2 states that any member of a fiscal body that is also a member of a volunteer fire department or works for the fire department that provides protection to the unit under contract is not allowed to vote on the budget for cities, towns, and townships. Also, IC code 36-6-6-17 says there's conflict of interest if any board member is an immediate family member to the township trustee and therefore they are not allowed to vote on the budget. So what do you do when a majority of your board members can't vote on the budget? You are going to need to petition your county council for an increase to the budget and/or levy amounts. The county council may grant or deny the petition only after conducting a public hearing on the petition. The unit itself will still hold its public hearing meeting, but there will not be an adoption meeting. Binding units. If you are a binding unit in the state of Indiana, you will lose your edit access to Gateway at 11:59 p.m. on September 1st. Submit access is granted to the appropriate fiscal body. It is important that binding units make sure all the information is entered into Gateway prior to the September 1st deadline. And it's extremely important that the fiscal body holds the public hearing and adoption meeting for all binding units. If the appropriate fiscal body does not hold the public hearing and adoption meeting for any of the binding units, then the budgets of both the binding unit and the fiscal body will be continued from the prior year. Libraries have a maximum amount they are allowed to adopt and have the library board remain control over the library budget. The calculation to determine whether the library is at the maximum budgeted amount or not is going to be the 2024 certified budget times the maximum levy growth quotient minus $1. And that will give you the maximum budget that a library can adopt and still maintain control over the budget. Libraries who advertise a budget more than this calculation will need to contact their fiscal body to handle the public hearing and adoption meeting. If you need assistance knowing if you're over this amount, please review the July estimate report that we will issue on this, or reach out to your budget field rep. If you have a question knowing who your fiscal body is, please reach out to State Library and they will help you make that determination. For school transfers, schools have the ability to transfer between the operations, education, and rainy day funds. Please use the appropriate revenue code when listing these transfers in on your Form 2. And also know that we are going to need a copy of the resolution that approves all transfers from July 1 through December 31 to include these as revenue on your Form 2. Now, when you want to show the expense coming out of a fund, you will show that on the Form 4B. You'll want to click on the Click to Edit button that you find right under the fund name. And then it'll show up here down towards the bottom. Says school transfers out, transfers between education, operations, and referendum fund. The first column is going to be for the last half of this year, and the second column is going to be for all of next year. Next, we're going to talk about the debt worksheet. Now, when you're filling out your debt worksheet, you're going to want to make sure that you are looking at when you actually plan to pay your debts. If your payment is due July 15th, but you're budgeting to pay that in June, make sure you have it marked to show that you're going to pay it in June. When you're looking at the line 5 amount, ask yourself if you've already made your payment for the first half of the year, or have you made your second payment for the first half of the year? And we see a little bit of both each year, so both are fine. If you are unsure, please reach out to your budget field rep. Also, if you have a new debt that was not linked in Gateway as part of the prior year budget, you're going to need to link that debt this year. You'll want to select Customize Funds, Departments, Debts, and Revenue Codes, and then select Customize Debts by Fund List. On this page, you'll click that little Edit Debts, and then check the box by all the new debts you would like to add. If you are looking at issuing a new debt for this year, you can check the box next to anticipated debt, and that would allow you to put in what you're anticipating to pay for this year. So what do you do when the unexpected happens? So if you don't have a quorum on a public hearing, unfortunately, this is going to require a complete restart to the process. You'll need to pick new public hearing dates and times and make sure that you have enough time to resubmit your Form 3. And you're going to need to make sure that the adoption meeting is still at least 10 days after that public hearing. Please reach out to your Department of Local Government Finance budget field representative to help with making these changes. If you don't have a quorum at the adoption meeting, but you did at the public hearing, you won't be required to reschedule a new public hearing, but you will need to reschedule a new adoption meeting. Your budget field representative can help you through this process as well. What happens when the board needs more time to discuss the budget? This is where we look at the Form 4 adoption meeting date may not match the date that is in the Form 3. So if the board needs more time to discuss the budget, you will need to continue the meeting to a specific date, time, and location. And we're going to ask for meeting minutes to confirm that the adoption meeting that was advertised in the Form 3 did take place and that it was continued to the date that was signed on the Form 4. What do you do if an objection is filed after the public hearing? So taxpayers can file an objection to the budget after the public hearing. If this happens, the board is going to need to adopt findings on the objection at the adoption meeting, along with any changes to the budget based on those objections. When you upload your signed Form 4, you're going to need to include the objection that was filed on the budget, and you're going to need to include the findings that were adopted at the adoption meeting. Questions?
Yes, we do have a few for you. We have, the first one is, do we still have to hold a public hearing for additional appropriations? We were not invoiced for 2023 CCMG until into 2024. So I didn't have MVH and LRS appropriated for 2024.
Yes, you still need to have an additional appropriation for, I'm sorry, you do need to have a public hearing for additional appropriations. But additional appropriations only require one meeting. You can adopt the additional appropriation at the public hearing for that additional appropriation.
Okay, great. Our next question is, who classifies as a binding unit?
As a general rule, it will be any board that is appointed. There are now libraries all have appointed boards, but they do have the special legislation that allows them to retain control of their budget if they stay with under the growth quotient for the year.
Okay, great. Our next question is, what is the MLGQ for 2025?
The maximum levy growth quotient comes out July 1st. It is issued to us from the state budget agency, and we have not received that yet.
That's all of our questions right now. If anybody has any questions, please enter them into the chat feature today, and we will get those answered before we close here. One thing that did get asked this morning that I wanted to remind everybody is that we will have the new LDA application has been launched, and we have stopped taking in paper LDA applications as of January 1 of 2024. All units will need to use the online LDA application for the DLGF applications. All the other state agencies that utilize Gateway are not utilizing the system, but this is something for the DLGF to help with management of who has access to the permissions. The submitters will not change. Those will still retain the submitter access, as well as school superintendents and a few binding units that we're still working through specifics for. But anybody that has editor access or read-only access, this will be an annual process. They will lose their permissions starting on June 6th. On June 7th, you'll be able to log back in to the online LDA application, and you can, submitters can grant access to those individuals with a Gateway account, or those that need editor or read-only access can request it from the submitter, and then the submitter will need to log in and approve their access. But this will be done each year, just as other reports are submitted in Gateway. But we are that's taking place on June 6th, and we will let you know afterwards, and we will send out reminders. This was in the week, has been in the weekly email. We've touched on it in prior webinars, as well as other documentation that we've sent out. We have a user guide that we will provide to all of our users, and those that have utilized the system have been they really like it, and they feel that it's very easy to use. So one of the questions, Miranda, we have a few more questions. So one of them I could take, if we already have access, do we have to resubmit the online LDA? Yes, you will. This will be an annual process. Again, submitters, if you are a submitter for a unit, your access will not change. This will only be for individuals who have read-only and editor access, and this will be an annual check before in June that we will send out reminders. So that will take place each year. Let me just scroll before I flip over. Okay. So the next question, Miranda, for you is, when will we find out the amount for CCMH?
That'll be part of our July estimates as well. We need the growth quotient to be able to calculate the mental health and developmental disabilities amounts.
Okay, great. Our next question is, we have water and wastewater as part of our municipality responsibility. Do we have to include them in the budgets? If not, then the debt service for the SRF bonds will not show up.
We will not review those funds, but I don't know that there is any reason why you can't include them. But we do not review the water and the wastewater funds unless there is one of the special circumstances that allows for a tax levy.
Okay, we'll do, since that is all of our questions that we've had submitted so far, I'll do a couple quick housekeeping reminders in case anybody else does have a question. As Miranda has up on the slide, we have our contact information there. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Miranda and or your field rep. Then we'll get those answered for you. You can also reach out to me and I can get you to the right staff person. Also, if you have technical issues with Gateway, you need assistance with your accounts, you can reach out to our support line. That's that first email on that slide there. So feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help you get everything ready to go for as you plan for your budget season for this next year. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. As I stated earlier, we will be sending out an email to all those that pre-registered and will also be available on the DLGF webinar webpage. We will have a link to the PowerPoint, a link to the survey, a link to the video, and a link to the CE form. You will have access that will be sent out in an email later this week. So you can share that with others that may not have been able to attend, or you can go back and refresh yourself later on. But we will also have that on the DLGF website. So please watch for that later this week. Miranda, we have another question that came up. Do you review the additionals for income tax expenditures?
If it is the lit certified shares as part of the general fund, yes, we do review those. If they are additional appropriations in your economic development or public safety funds, those are considered reporting only.
Great. Well, that is all of our questions that we have right now. Like I said, please reach out to Miranda or your field rep if you have questions, and they will get back with you as soon as possible. We want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we hope that you will be able to join us in June for our legislative update webinar that we will be holding. You can sign up for that. If you are not able to attend, you can always register, and then you will get the link for the webinar later on when we send out the follow-up information, and you'll be able to go back and review that that webinar. So thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you next month in June.